Okay, in this video I'm hoping to actually show some very basic opening techniques. Probably going to be heavily edited as I make mistakes or take too long and just want to skip to the end. What I might do to begin with is use a plastic practice lock or my metal one. Come in nice little boxes like this. I actually would recommend them, not because they're a particularly good training aid. One thing I learnt straight off is that these are pinned in such a shallow way that you could probably pick them with a hairpin, a bobby pin, or breathe on them, actually, for that matter. Sneeze in the general direction, you probably open one of these. But what they are good is they're really nice to be able to show people how locks work, go on the inside, see how you put the key in, the pins all move to the right position, you turn the lock and it opens up. It's easy to see the mechanism move, all the pins stay at the shear line. Yeah, so it's not hard to get into, admittedly, but really nice to show people what you're doing, how you're doing it, and also to demonstrate some picking techniques with an easy open. Okay, so let's start with probably the L rake. I mean, this is where I started. You can see here that the L rake is supposed to replicate a sort of high-low bidding on a standard key. It's you can see that this is the actual key, and it's not the same. It's not the same at all. In fact, you can see that the bidding on this is on the furthest pin towards the front over here. That's quite high, and then it goes low, well, low, 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 I guess, and then this last pin here is high again. So this isn't too similar, but what we're trying to do is rock it backwards and forwards, so maybe this will move up and be slightly more like it there, then as I rock it back it might just pop that last pin there. Okay, so what you're doing is you're just doing a gentle in and out seesaw motion. You can move it up and down a bit. If the key was cut lower, you'd put it into the lock shallow. If it's deeper, you may be able to scrub and rock a little bit closer to the top of the lock. All right. So put those keys to the side. What do we say is the most important thing? Tensioning the lock. Nothing special. Just a relatively nice, slim stainless steel tensioner. Goes into the lock. Always check, by the way, always check that the lock moves freely. If it bounces a little bit as you try to move it, that means you're not snarling up on the body of the lock itself, and you're just moving the cylinder. And then what you need to do here is, again, try to get the right angle so you can see. Might have to reach around my iPad here so it's not focusing on my other hand, and again putting it into the lock, putting some mild tension on, and you're moving this backwards and forwards, and already you can see I've got an open. That isn't much to do with my own skill as opposed to just how easy this lock is to pick, but there's a couple of things I hopefully demonstrated there. One is tensioning. Okay, when I was first learning to do these things, even with simple locks like this, I was really putting pressure on that. It's like, yeah, when those pins pop up into the top of the shear line, man, they got to stay there. So I'm going to put so much tension on it. So I'm going to bend that tension wrench right in. All it ended up doing is I was just trapping all of these key pins with such heavy tension. They weren't going anywhere, so that lock wasn't going to open. So just be gentle. There's no prize for putting heavy tension on some of these locks. There are applications where you need to put a bit heavier tension on, but for the most part, if you've got it so it's just, you can feel it when the lock itself starts to stop on its own next to those pins. Then stop too. Don't put any more pressure on. Just turn it until it stops. You know, those pins weren't there, it continued turning. So you got the right pressure. Leave it. Again, with the city rake, you can scrub back and forth, and it'll probably open it anyway, like it does. But the technique is usually with this rake is you know, you're moving up and down and in and out in a gentle way. Okay, so you don't have to be too heavy-handed. At some point, it'll just work. Where doesn't this work? Where it's particularly high-low bidding. Okay, so that means where you've got key pins cut, so they need to be lifted very high and lifted very low. So this isn't very good for that. What would be good for that? Possibly the bow guitar. Okay, you can see automatically that the amplitude, the difference between the peak and the trough on this, a lot higher. Will it work on this? Probably, but again, that's because this is a practice lock. It's designed with easy opening in mind, and actually that's one of the things I like most about it. Why be put off? Why buy something which is supposed to get you interested into how locks work and lock picking, and then make it really, really hard for beginners? So yeah, I wouldn't lock my bike up with it, but as a simple training and practice aid, I really like these, and you get them online, placed on Amazon for under a tenner. So buy one. How does the bow guitar work? About the same. Again, you can scrub back and forth down the lock. That's fine too. You can rock it a bit too. It's presenting, like all rakes, different profiles to the lock. So in mild tension, and we're open. Okay. Again, very little to do with my own skill, more to do with how easy this lock is to open. Let's see if I can do something with the snake rake. I like this one because you can choose in a way where you're raking. So I can rake up here at the end, I can pull it back and rake these ones. I can, after a while, with the right tension, you can feel which pin is sticking, which is the one which is already kind of binding, and just help it on along its way. So I quite like this one. I've got into some relatively secure, or supposedly secure, locks with this, and you wouldn't think it would, this tiny little snaky bit of metal, but there you go. So again, rake back and forth, and put a bit more tension on, and springs open again. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't use this to lock anybody up, would you? You just wouldn't. Interesting ones, kinetic attacks. You don't see many people doing these on YouTube videos, mostly because it probably ruins the locks. I'm not so worried about ruining this. I'd probably just buy another one anyway and use it as practice. The idea with this, and maybe you can see if I move it a bit closer, put it in and you're pushing up against the pins. So if you look there, can you see that some of them are already at or above the shear line? And then what you're doing is you lift, tension on, and then rip out at the same time. Ready? And it may not work first time. Release the tension, try again. Oh. Ha. Okay. Can you see there? I left the tension off a little bit too much. The tension wrench has slipped round and gone back up into the keyway. Really not that useful. Let's try that again. Does this work? No, not always. This way of ripping the locks, but yeah, there you go. I don't know if you saw that on camera. I might try and do that again to make sure if you did. There we go. Let's try that again. Ah, tension, tension, tension. There we go. Again, it's more the lock than me, but and you see that there's a little bend on this. It's because it's really easy to get this caught as you're ripping out by if you're not pulling straight, you're twisting this in the lock, it gets jammed, and you're pulling on it. I can imagine that at some point this will probably break. Not Southord's mistake, it'd be because you're being too heavy-handed on it. But just bear that in mind. Useful to have in the kit, but can be a bit rough on the lock. Just by way of demonstration, before I leave you alone, we've been through most of the types of rake. Here's a snowman. I want to show you how much space this takes up actually in the lock. You know, you can actually see, because you've got the double ball there, it takes up quite a lot of room. So realistically, you're going to want to use your snake rake or some kind of equivalent, which just, you know, just goes in and takes up so much less space in the lock. But you know, it works. The ball rake works. You've got room, and it's the only one there. It works better on wafer locks. It slips past them a lot easier. But you can just put that in, down the lock barrel, and rake it back and forth, and hopefully we get an open. There we go. I guess the last technique to demonstrate with this is single pin picking. Again, you need to use the right hook for the job. Experience is the only way to really tell you, but just go in with a standard hook first. That's what I'd do. You know, if you don't have enough room, or you're not getting the picks that you want, you know, going with a shallower or a deeper hook. What you're trying to do is you're just trying to lift those pins above the shear line. You're putting enough tension on, just enough to hold them in place, so when they do go to the top of the lock, you know, you're not going to let them slip back down, but you're also not putting so much tension on that these pins bind up so hard that you literally can't push them above the shear line either. Again, it's best to go for a lighter touch. You'll know you haven't quite got that if you push a pin up and then you hear it go click back down again. But maybe put a little bit more tension on. And the technique on this, and by the way, it's a lot easier said than done, and this is where I'm learning myself, is you go along the pins and feel for the one which is actually sticking. All the rest should be springy, nice and springy. Then you'll have one which just goes, no, I'm not ready, and I think I've got it. And I push that one up over the shear line, and you go along and you're just checking, is there anybody else who is stuck? I think it's the last pin, just needs lifting slightly. There we go, got it. Now you can see here that these pins are set. If I lift them all up, you can see that they're set quite shallow. In fact, if I just use the flat of the pick, I could probably pick the lock just by pushing them all up at a slight angle. Again, this lock is designed to be easy to pick, but single pin picking in a real lock does feel different, and that's another important thing with these plastic locks to remember, is that they are different. They feel different. The pins are pushing against plastic and metal. I think Deviant Ollum says in one of his books that you should really practice on real locks, and he's right. Practice locks which are cut away, they just feel different when you're trying to pick them, and that isn't a good thing. It's good to learn on them, sure. It's good to practice, good to be able to see what you're doing, but not actually useful in the real world. So again, let's do one last single pin pick of this. Where going along, I'm just trying to feel what I'm doing. I heard a click. I'm going backwards to forwards. That's fine. I think I want to wrench in properly. There we go. Let's try this again. Ah, that's much better. 1, 5, 4, 3, 2. Ah, got it. There we go. So this pin 2 is probably the deepest pin on this one. So those are quickly the sorts of picking techniques that that you'll need to do. I think my next video is going to be more about picking real locks.